Well, Merry Christmas, guys, and all of you joining in with us today. We're so glad you're here. And speaking of Christmas, let me just start by saying a quick word of thanks. I want to thank all of you guys who were so generous and gave in such a big way last week to our Christmas in Coweta program. I mean, guys, you are always so generous, and every year I'm always blown away again by just how generous you really are to the children in our community. I mean, you guys shop for these kids like they were your own. And I just tell you, this week and yesterday, as they came through our doors, so many families were just blown away, overwhelmed by the amount of generosity that you gave to these kids. And so, because of you, about 500 or more children, they're going to have their Christmas morning completely changed this week. And I say this often, but I'll just say it again. I'm just so proud that I get to be a part of this community, this church. So, guys, thank you so much for what you did. But I also want to remind you of another opportunity that we have. We've been talking to you about for the past few weeks that we have the opportunity to be generous one more time and to make a huge difference in the lives of some people. And it's through our year-end offering. And I just want to remind you, we're asking everybody who calls Community Christian their church to consider making a one-time gift above and beyond what you normally give to CCC. And just remember, this money's not for us. This doesn't come here to our offices. This is not about us. This is about our community. In fact, we're going to be supporting 2 different projects this year. Every single dime that you give this year is going to go toward one of 2 projects. And the 2 projects are, first of all, in Haiti. Many of you know we adopted a community there, the community of Maluret. And we've been sending teams down there for the past few years. We've been helping support that community. And this year, we're going to be helping them complete the construction of the community school. Many of you are even sponsoring children from there through our child sponsorship program. And this is the school that those kids attend. So part of the money will be going down there to help them. But then the other part of the money actually will be staying right here in our community. We're going to be supporting Bridging the Gap in downtown Newnan once again and helping them make some improvements to the facilities down there. And I just tell you, just a couple of weeks ago, I was down there helping with a team of folks just to serve the folks in that ministry. And, man, they're doing such great work down there. I've been in this community 20 years now. And I'd say Bridging the Gap is probably the most well-run nonprofit I have ever seen in this county. And so we're going to be supporting them this year once again with our offering. So we want everybody to be a part of this. We want 100% participation from our church. So just to remind you, we need your offering in by December 31st. So between now and the end of the year, we're asking everybody in the church to consider giving $30 per person toward this project. Again, if you can't do that, we understand. Just do whatever you can. If you can do more, well, we'll take that too. So do more. But on the screen, you'll see right now, we've got lots of ways for you to participate in this and to give. You can send a text. You can do it online. You can use the envelope in your chair. As you heard a couple of weeks ago, as promised, if you call the church office, Ed will come to your house and pick up the offering. That's right. He said he would, so we're going to hold him to that. Ed will come to your house. Just a quick word of advice on that, because I've known Ed for quite some time now. If Ed shows up at your house, just don't feed him, okay? He might just decide to stick around like a stray dog. So, just word to the wise on that one. So, all right, enough of that. Let's talk about Christmas, because it is Christmas after all. So let's talk about the Christmas story. Now, the Christmas story, as you know, is the story of how the life of Jesus all began. It's about the beginning, how the whole story got started. So what better way to read the Christmas story than to start at the beginning, right? And there are 4 books in your Bible in the New Testament that tell us the story of Jesus. The very first book that's in there is the book of Matthew. So, well, I figured, why don't we just start reading the book of Matthew? It's the start of the story of Jesus, so why don't we do that? So let's do that. We're going to read together the first words in the Bible about the story of Jesus. So here we go. A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Solomon the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam the father of Abijah. Abijah the father of Asa. Asa the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat the father of Joram. Joram the father of Uzziah. Uzziah the father of Jotham. Jotham the father of Ahaz. Ahaz the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah the father of Manasseh. Manasseh the father of Ammon. Ammon the father of Josiah. And Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel the father of Abiud. Abiud the father of Eliakim. Eliakim the father of Azor. Azor the father of Zadok. Zadok the father of Achim. Achim the father of Eliud. Eliud the father of Eleazar. Eleazar the father of Matthan. Matthan the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. I will have you know, I have been practicing that all week just for you. Now, can I just say a couple of things before we move into this? I know we're in church, and I know we're reading the Bible, and it is God's Word after all, but can we just be a little bit honest here, okay? Your mind was wandering there for just a second, other than the fact that you were amazed that I actually pronounced all those names. You were numbing out there for a minute. I know you were, right? See, this happens all the time. About this time of year, I'll have people come up to me and say, man, I'm going to get motivated in the new year. I'm going to read my Bible. And I always say, good, go for it. And they'll say, all right, I'm going to read the whole New Testament. So I'm going to start right at the beginning, and I'm going to read the book of Matthew. And I don't say this, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking to myself, I hope you get past the first 17 verses. Because a lot of people get started, and they get into what we just read, and they go, wow, not as easy as I thought, right? I mean, doesn't it make you kind of wonder, just a little bit, doesn't it make you wonder what Matthew, the guy who wrote this, must have been thinking? I mean, he's about to write the story of the most influential, significant person who ever lived. Don't you think he would have wanted to start with something a little bit catchy? Something that might grab the attention of the audience? Something that's not a cure for insomnia? Now, all kidding aside, okay? All joking aside. There's a reason for what we just read. See, in first century Israel, at that time and in that culture, they loved genealogies, family trees, lists of ancestors. Loved them. Because remember, in this day, there's no electricity. Nobody's going home in the evenings and watching their favorite program. Nobody's binge watching television anymore at that time. Nobody's downloading music, downloading videos, downloading podcasts, none of that stuff. So in that culture, mainly what they did for entertainment was they would sit around the fire at night and they would tell stories. And their favorite way to tell stories was to list their genealogies, was to go back and to sit around and talk about their family tree. They loved to just list the names of their ancestors. And as they would list each name, they would then break into a story, and they would tell the great stories of all of their ancestors and all the great things that they did. See, all these names that we read and we laugh about and we can hardly pronounce them, these names were dear to them. They all knew these names. When they heard these names, they remembered all the stories. And it gave them a sense of identity. It gave them a sense of dignity about their life. It was this sense that I'm not a nobody. I'm connected. I'm about something greater than me. I have a history. It was as if this was their motto. Ask me who I am, and I'll tell you about my people. Ask me who I am, what I'm all about, and then I'll tell you the stories of my people. In fact, scholars tell us to this day, if you go to the Middle East, there are these bands of nomads, and these nomadic tribes, and they can literally list their ancestors for generations and generations, centuries, in fact. I mean, it's no exaggeration that these cultures, they can sit for hours and just list the names of their family tree. Because they didn't have written records in those days like we do. And so these were very, very important. In Jesus' day, genealogies were used for for things like legal status, for things like property rights. I mean, when you wanted to prove who you were, that you owned a certain piece of property, you used your genealogy. You'd quote your genealogy. It was almost like an ID card. And for generations, the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, had been waiting for a Messiah, the anointed one. And if there was one thing that the Jewish people knew, they knew the family line that Messiah was going to come from. So when you read what we just read, it's really not that surprising that Matthew would just start the story of Jesus with a record of Jesus' family. Because this is all part of proving that he was the Messiah who would come from God, save his people. So, in reality, that part is not so surprising. But I'll tell you what is surprising. What is surprising is some of the names that Matthew decided to slip into the family tree. Now, I'll just let you take a wild guess on this one. When the nation of Israel, when the Jewish people would sit and list their genealogies, do you think they most likely used to set up a bloodline the names of fathers or the names of mothers? Well, you probably guessed it. It was the fathers. It was a male-dominated culture. In fact, we've talked about this before. Women didn't fare too well at that time and in that culture. They weren't given any legal rights. They couldn't establish a bloodline. Their testimony couldn't even be used in a court of law. So when you read a story like this and you read the names of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, you're not shocked. I mean, that's supposed to be in a family tree. But what's surprising are verses like this. Verse 3. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Now Matthew throws in the name of a woman, technically where it doesn't belong, but not just that. This is no ordinary woman. In fact, my guess is you don't even know the story of Tamar. So let me tell you the story of Tamar, because no matter how much time you spend in church, you probably don't know it. It's found way back in the very first book in your Bible. It's in Genesis chapter 38. You start with a guy named Judah. And Judah decides he needs to go find a wife for his oldest son, which is very important in their culture, that they would have children and carry on the family line. So Judah decides to go to this foreign nation. He goes to the land of Canaan, and he goes among the Canaanites, and he finds a wife for his son, and her name was Tamar. That's where she comes in. So he marries Tamar to his oldest son. Now, Judah's oldest son, his name was Now, obviously, they didn't spend a whole lot of time on that name, as you can tell, but as you would expect with a name like he's not a great guy. In fact, he's really messed up. He's really wicked, and in fact, he gets executed for some of the things that he's done. So what that means is Tamar is left all on her own. She has no husband to take care of her. Now, according to their law and according to their custom, Judah, the father of the family, is required to take care of her. He's supposed to support her and continue to support her within the family structure. Judah didn't do that. He breaks his covenant, he breaks his promise, he breaks custom, he breaks the law, and he just sort of lets her go, and she has to fend for herself. Now, because she has no legal recourse, she can't do anything about it, and so Tamar is just sort of stuck. So she comes up with a plan. Now, I'm not saying this is a good plan. I'm not saying this is something that anybody should have done, but this is her plan. She disguises herself like a prostitute one night, and she goes out and she stands on the street corner. She picks a street where she knows that her father-in-law, Judah, is going to be passing by that night. Now, it's dark. So she puts a veil over her face, and she disguises herself so he won't know who she is. He comes by, and I guess he liked what he saw, whatever he saw, and he takes her, and he sleeps with her. Now, for whatever reason, whether Judah had money that night or not, I don't know, but he decides not to pay her. But instead of paying her, he gives her a little bit of collateral. He says, here, take my staff and take my seal, which were very distinct, very important possessions in that day, and use them as collateral, and I'll come back later, and I'll pay you. And he leaves her. Now, as the story goes on, a few months go by, and Judah finds out through the grapevine that his widowed daughter-in-law, Tamar, is now pregnant, and he's furious. She's dishonored his family, okay? So he gets so mad, he has her brought in front of him, and he's going to have her executed right there, right then. He's just furious. So there's this dramatic scene, and they bring Tamar out and in front of her father-in-law, and he's going to have her executed. And she stops, and she says, hey, look, execute me if you want. Burn me alive if you want. But I just need to know one thing. And she holds up a staff and a seal. And she says, the father of the baby that I'm carrying is the man who owns this staff and this seal. Anybody know who belongs to this? Anybody? Any guesses? And Judah sees it. It's this dramatic scene, and he realizes what he's done. He knows he's done wrong. He stops the execution. He repents of his sin. Now, let me say one thing. I grew up in church. I went to Sunday school every Sunday. I was taught all kinds of Bible stories growing up. Not that one. I was never taught that one, and you kind of wonder why, right? Not really. Nobody ever told me the story of Tamar. See, I know some of you guys think that you have a dysfunctional family. Listen, you got nothing on this family. Nothing, you know? So, as the story goes, this is sort of how it finishes up. Tamar not only gives birth to a son, she gives birth to two. She's pregnant with twins. Now, at the moment they're born, it's a really fascinating story. One of them, they say, reaches his hand outside the womb. And in that day, this is very, very important. It's very important to establish the firstborn because, again, there's all these things about bloodlines and birthrights and who's going to be the leader of the family, who's going to take over and inherit everything, and it was always the firstborn. One of the babies reaches outside the womb, and so the midwife who was there takes a scarlet cord. Now, remember that detail. She takes a scarlet cord, and she ties it around his wrist to signify who was born first because, again, we've got to establish a bloodline because Israel's waiting for a Messiah. There's a promise and a blessing being passed down from Abraham to Isaac, to Jacob, and now to Judah, and then his son, his firstborn. One day the deliverer is coming through this line. So they tie that scarlet cord around his wrist. And remember that detail because the scarlet cord will run through the whole story. But the point is, Matthew writes Tamar into the story, a daughter-in-law who dressed up like a prostitute, who slept with her father-in-law, and one of her children, her son, becomes one of the Messiah's ancestors. Matthew wrote that in his book. You have to ask this question. Why would he do that? I mean, come on, there are lots of great stories and lots of great women of faith all throughout the bloodline. And he could have told any story. He could have included anyone in the genealogy. But he chooses her, a foreigner. She's not an Israelite. She's an outsider. Her story is a disaster. It's an embarrassing story, isn't it? And Matthew while he's writing one day, just says, you know what? I think I'll just leave Tamar's name right here. Why would he do that? Well, we'll get to that. But he's not done, actually. Look at the next verse, verse 5. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, another woman. Rahab. She's another Gentile. She's outside the Israelite nation. She's outside the Jewish people. She's a pagan. She doesn't follow the God of the Israelites. And not only that, she doesn't dress up like a prostitute. Rahab was a prostitute. I mean, that was her life's profession. That's how she made a living. Just an aside here. Have you ever noticed, if you've read much of the Bible, you ever noticed how there are quite a number of stories about prostitutes in the Bible? See, in the ancient world, if a woman wasn't married and she didn't have a family to take care of her, she basically had three options. She could starve to death, she could go out on the streets and beg, or she could turn to prostitution. Nobody in that day wanted to be in this situation, but women were forced into it all the time. Now, the story is that Rahab, this lady that he mentions, she lives in a city called Jericho. Her house is literally a part of the city wall in Jericho. Joshua, he's the leader of the Israelite nation at that time, sends some spies into the city. It's not a Jewish city. They're wanting to take it over. He sends spies in. He says, go check it out, see how the land lies so we can get in there and take it over. Because Jericho is the very first city that the nation of Israel is going to overtake in what was known as the Promised Land. This is the place that God was leading his people to after through Moses, he had broke them out of slavery in Egypt. And so he sends these spies in there, and for some reason, when the spies get there, this woman, Rahab, meets up with them. They get into some trouble, and she just has a soft place in her heart for them. And she reaches out to them, she helps them. She actually saves their lives when they were about to be captured. Nobody knows why. She just decided to do that out of the goodness of her heart, whatever. Her heart was soft to God, and she was soft to his people. And so these spies tell her, they said, for saving our lives and for what you've done for us, we want to give you a reward, and here's your reward. We're about to come in and we're going to take over this city, and there are going to be a lot of people killed. But if you and your family will come together, get inside of your house, and if you will take a scarlet cord and tie it in the window, we'll see that, and we'll know that it's your house, and we'll let you live. We won't come and take over your place. The scarlet cord, if you put it in the window, we'll see it, and you'll be saved. You can read this story in the book of Joshua, chapter 2, if you want. But again, if you were among the first people to read the family tree of Jesus, you read about a woman who's a Gentile. She's not one of them. She's a prostitute. And again, he highlights this story. It's a bit of a scandal. But look at the very next line. He goes on. He says, and then there's Boaz, who was the father of Obed, and his mother was Ruth. Now, this one's probably a little bit more popular. Maybe you've heard the story of Ruth. It all starts with a woman. Her name is Naomi. Naomi is a Jewish woman. She and her husband live in the town of Bethlehem, in fact. But there's a famine in the land, and they begin to starve. And so in order to better their life, they decide to move away. So she picks up her 2 sons and her husband, and they move off to a country called Moab. Now, they live in Moab for years, and her sons grow up, and they're doing okay. And as sons tend to do, they meet some women in Moab, and they decide to get married. And so they marry these 2 Moabite women. At that point, Naomi's family's life, it doesn't go so well. Her husband dies. Her first son dies. Her second son dies. And it's basically all that's left is Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law. One of those daughters-in-law was named Ruth. So one day Naomi realizes there's no life left for me here. I'm just going to go back to my people. I'm going to go and see if I can survive over there. And so she comes to both of her daughters-in-law and she says, look, there's no reason for you to go back with me. I don't expect you to leave your home, your people. So just stay here, get married, have a great life. I'm going back. But Ruth just loves her mother-in-law, and she won't leave her. I know it's an unbelievable story. I get it, but she loves her mother-in-law. And Ruth says this famous line to her mother-in-law. In fact, you've probably heard this verse. It's been quoted at weddings. Ruth 1:16. She says, wherever you go, I'll go. Wherever you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. It's a great story, isn't it? Now, there's something that you've probably never been told about this story. Most of you probably don't know this. Ruth wasn't just a Gentile. Ruth was a Moabite. Now, that's significant. Because according to Genesis chapter 19, the whole Moabite nation, the whole nation, were the product of an incestuous relationship between a man named Lot and his daughter. I know, it's a horrible story. So in the eyes of the Israelites, God's people, the Moabites were about as backward and as wicked and disgusting as a people could be. In fact, this is what the Jewish law states. This is written into their law. No Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. So what that means is you could be 10 generations removed from a Moabite ancestor, and you are still not accepted in the nation of Israel. Ruth is a Moabite. Matthew says, hey, why not put her in the story of Jesus? Why not prove to the world that not only did Jesus come through a sketchy past, he's got Moabite blood in his family line. Matthew's not done yet. Verse 6, David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Now, many of you already know who was Uriah's wife. It was a woman named Bathsheba. I taught a message on this story a few months ago. Some of you might remember, but think about it this way. Matthew comes to the part in the line of Jesus that he mentions King David, a famous guy, a guy who's always been respected, a powerful king, highly respected. And he can put any detail about David into this genealogy that he wants to. He could say, David, the one who wrote all the great Psalms. David, the one who killed Goliath, the giant, won the great battles. David, the warrior. He doesn't do that. when it comes time for Matthew to write a detail about the life of David, here's basically what he writes by writing that one line. David, the one who committed adultery with his good friend's wife, got her pregnant, murdered her husband, and then covered it up so he could marry her. Listen, make no mistake about what we're reading here. Matthew, the one who wrote this, is doing this intentionally. He starts out the entire story of the life of Jesus with this genealogy, to which all the people in that day would have said, "Great job, Matthew, great start. That's exactly what you should do. Way to go. Establish the bloodline. That's what we like." But he keeps throwing in these names, and they don't belong. Women, pagan, scandal. And it's like, Matthew, what are you thinking, man? Don't you know what a good genealogy is supposed to do? It's supposed to be, ask me who I am, I'll tell you the story of my people. Why in the world do you want to reflect that on the identity of a man that you say is the Son of God? See, this is one of those moments where I just have to tell you, if I were going to write a story and make it up to try to get you to believe that Jesus was God, I would not write this, and neither would you. You don't write things like this. It goes counter to your purpose. It's one of those reasons, I just have to say, this is one of those reasons that I'm convinced that the Bible is true, because it doesn't read like a made-up story, because nobody would make that up to try to convince you that Jesus is God. It doesn't read like a story. It reads like history. It reads like what actually happened. See, here's what Matthew in this whole thing is trying to communicate. Matthew is saying, look, the story you're about to read, the story of Jesus, it's not going to go like you expect it to go. Get ready for a surprise. Because the people that Jesus is going to identify with, the people that Jesus is going to love, the people that Jesus will bring into his kingdom, they're not going to look like the people you expect. Things are going to get a little messy. Things are going to get a little bit scandalous. This is not going to be respectable. Because with the coming of Jesus, anybody who wants to get in is about to get in. Because Jesus wants everybody. It's almost like God intended for people to read this list of names and to say to themselves, oh, so you're saying that Jesus is the kind of person who's not ashamed of sinners. I mean, he puts them in his family tree. And listen, I get that for some of you, you're here today simply for one reason, because it's Christmas. And it's just what we do, right? We go to church. It's Christmas. Or maybe all year long, a friend of yours or a family member has been telling you about this church. Come to church, come to church. And you've put them off, and you finally said, you know what? It's Christmas. I'll go. And you're here. We're glad you're here. But here's the truth about you. And I'll say this. If I were you, and if I'd had the experience that you had had, I'd probably feel the same way. But you're not that into church. You generally kind of stay away from church and organized religion and the whole God thing because you've looked at it from the outside looking in. And for the most part, here's what you see. Church is basically for either good people who've got all their stuff figured out, or it's for people who don't have all their stuff figured out, but they like to pretend like they have all their stuff figured out because it makes them look better or it makes them feel better about themselves. Church is for people who like to come and put on the act, and basically it's just people who are living a little bit of a hypocritical life. And you're thinking, church, Jesus, if that's what it's about, it's just not for me. Or there are others of you that you think a little bit differently. You look on the outside looking into church and you say, that's not for me because, well, I'm just not the right kind of person. I've got this past, or I've got this life that I'm living, and my sin's too dark, or it's not as respectable. It's something they are ashamed of, and so that God thing, that church thing, that Jesus thing, that's just not for me either. Not for somebody who's done what I've done. And I think today what Jesus would say to you is this. Are you kidding me? Here, take a look at my family. Just take a look at my family. You have no idea who I am. And you have no idea what I can do. Just open up your eyes and see who I really am. See, did you know this? Did you know that when Jesus was here, when he walked this planet, that Jesus associated so closely with the wrong kinds of people that he was actually accused of being a glutton and a drunk? That's what they called him. In fact, Jesus was given a term when he was here. He was called a friend of sinners. Now, in our churches today, we use that like a badge of honor. That's a compliment. Jesus is the friend of sinners. We write it into songs. We sing about it. Truth is, in Jesus' day, they weren't singing about that. That wasn't a badge of honor. That wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation. It was a label. It was a criticism. And in these very first lines of the story of Jesus, Matthew is just trying to clue us in. Look, the Messiah is going to get into trouble over some of his friendships. Matthew is also the one who writes this into his story. Matthew tells us that soldiers mocked Jesus, that the soldiers put a robe on the body of Jesus. A robe, by the way, that had turned scarlet from his blood. They put a crown of thorns on his head. They put spikes through his hands and his feet, a sword through his side. And on the cross, there was a scarlet thread. That scarlet thread had run all the way through the stories of the Old Testament, all the way through these old stories about all these disreputable, left out, cast out sinners. And finally, we see it one more time, ultimately in the one who took all of those sins upon himself. The scarlet thread, folks, is the sign of salvation. And it's been running through the story the whole time, all the way through to the blood-stained cross. That's why the story of Jesus, we say, is good news. You know, years ago, I heard a story that has become one of my favorite stories of all time that illustrate this point that I'm trying to make to you about who God is and what Jesus' story really is all about. In fact, I've shared this story several times in this church, and I had actually forgotten about it for a while, and I had a friend of mine come up to me. We were talking about something else, and he reminded me of this story. He said, "Oh, I love that story that you told years and years ago." And I said, "You know what? I'm going to tell that again sometime," and I thought today was a great opportunity. It's a true story. It's about a moment in the life of a Christian writer. His name is Tony Campolo. And as Tony tells the story, he was in Hawaii one night, and he describes how he got up real early one morning. He was feeling hungry. The jet lag and the time change was just different. And it's about 3:30 in the morning. He said he found his way into a diner, and he's at this diner, and all of a sudden, while he's sitting there eating at this diner, this door to the diner immediately swings open. And let me just read to you in his own words what happened next. To my discomfort in marched 8 or 9 provocative and boisterous prostitutes. It was a small place, and they sat on either side of me. Their talk was loud and crude. I felt completely out of place, and was just about to make my getaway when I overheard the woman sitting beside me say, "Tomorrow's my birthday. I'm going to be 39. Her friend responded in a nasty tone. "So what do you want from me? Birthday party? What do you want? Want me to get you a cake? Want me to sing you a happy birthday?" "Come on," said the woman sitting next to me. "I was just telling you it's my birthday. I don't want anything from you. I never had a birthday party in my whole life. Why should I have one now?" When I heard that, I made a decision. I sat and I waited until the woman left. Then I called to the guy behind the counter, and I said to him, "Do they come in here every night?" "Yeah." "The one right next to me, does she come here every night?" "Yeah." He said, "That's Agnes. She comes here every night. Why do you want to know?" "Well, because I heard her say tomorrow's her birthday." "What do you say you and I do something about that? What do you think about us throwing a birthday party for her here tomorrow night?" The guy loved the idea. He told his wife. She said, "That's wonderful. Agnes is one of those people who's really kind and nice, and no one ever really does anything nice and kind for her." "Look," I said, "if it's okay with you, I'll come back tomorrow morning about 2:30, and I'll decorate the place. I'll even bring the birthday cake." "No way," said Harry. That was his name. "The birthday cake's my thing. I'll make the cake." At 2:30 the next morning, I was back at the diner. I'd picked up crepe paper, decorations, made a sign on a big piece of cardboard that read, "Happy Birthday, Agnes." I decorated that diner from one end to the other. I had that diner looking good. The woman who did the cooking must have gotten word out in the street, because by 3:15, Every prostitute in Honolulu was in the place. There were wall-to-wall prostitutes and me. At 3:30 on the dot, the door of the diner swung open, and in came Agnes and her friend. I had everybody ready. I was going to MC. And when they all came in, we screamed, "Happy birthday!" Never have I seen a person so flabbergasted, so shaken. Her mouth fell open. Her legs buckled. Her friend grabbed her arm to steady her. As she was led to one of the stools by the counter, we all sang happy birthday to her. When we came to the end of our singing, "Happy birthday, dear Agnes, happy birthday to you," her eyes moistened. Then when the birthday cake with all the candles on it was carried out, she lost it, just openly cried. Harry gruffly mumbled, "Blow out the candles, Agnes. Come on. Blow out the candles. If you don't blow out the candles, I'm going to have to blow out the candles." After a few endless seconds, he did. Then he handed her a knife. Cut the cake, Agnes. Yo, Agnes, we all want some cake." Agnes looked down at the cake. Then without taking her eyes off of it, she slowly and softly said, "Look, Harry, is it all right with you if what I want to ask is it okay if I keep the cake for a little while? Is it all right if I don't eat it right away?" Harry shrugged. "Sure, it's okay. If you want to keep the cake, keep the cake. You could take it home if you want." "Can I?" she asked. Then looking at me, she said, I live just down the street, a couple doors. I want to take the cake home, okay? I'll be back. I'll be right back. Honest." She got off the stool, picked up that cake, carrying it like it was the Holy Grail, and walked slowly towards the door. As we all just stood there motionless, she left. When the door closed, there was a stunned silence in the place. Not knowing what else to do, I broke the silence by saying, "What do y'all say we pray?" Looking back on it now, it seems a little strange to be leading a prayer meeting with a bunch of prostitutes in a diner in Honolulu at 3:30 in the morning. But then it just felt like the right thing to do. So I prayed for Agnes. I prayed for her salvation. I prayed that her life would be changed. I prayed that God would be good to her. When I finished, Harry leaned over the counter, and with a trace of hostility in his voice, he said, "Hey, you never told me you were a preacher. What kind of church do you belong to?" And in one of those moments when just the right words come, I answered, "I belong to a church that throws birthday parties for prostitutes at 3:30 in the morning." Harry paused a moment. Then he almost sneered as he answered, "No, you don't. Because there's no church like that. Because if there was, I'd join it. I'd join a church like that." You know what the truth is? The truth is that is precisely the church that Jesus came to create. And I don't know where we got the other one from. I don't know where we got the church that is so perfect and proper and cleaned up. I don't know where we got that, but anybody who seriously reads the New Testament and reads the story of Jesus will discover that Jesus was one who loved to hang out and loved to be friends with all the left out people. All the people that you or me would not necessarily be proud to put into our family tree. Have you ever wondered around this time of year when all the Christmas stuff comes out and you start to see those nativity scenes? Have you ever just for a moment stopped to wonder why? Why in the world would the God of the universe decide to do it that way? Why would he choose to send his son into the world like that? I think it's because when you come to know Jesus, and I mean the real Jesus, when you know where he came from, when you realize how he was born. Jesus was born to a poor, unwed teenager. Jesus' first baby bed was a feeding trough where livestock were eating. Jesus' first house was a shelter built as a barn for farm animals. When you see who Jesus' friends were throughout his life, who he liked to hang out with, you'll find alcoholics, prostitutes, revolutionaries, a thief, some fishermen, an IRS agent. When you see who Jesus loved to help, the disabled, the mentally ill, the forgotten, the thrown away, the left out, when you truly see who Jesus is, there is no getting around this fact. Jesus, he's for everybody. Jesus he's for the rest of us. How could he not be? And the truth about you is you don't have to be anything other than what you are right now. You don't have to become anyone other than you. You don't have to clean up. You don't have to straighten up. Right now, Jesus is for you. So for the next few moments, I just want to leave you with that truth, and I want you to really meditate on it. At all of our campuses right now, our band is going to make their way to the stage, and they're going to prepare to sing a song with us. And I think this is one of the most profound Christmas songs ever written. But before we do that, here's what I want you to be thinking about while we sing. You know, God could have chosen a million different ways, and he could have chosen a million different people to bring his son into this world. He could have. He could have done it any way he wanted to. The question is, why did he do it this way? And the reason is simple, and you need to hear this. This is who God is. And I don't care what anybody's ever told you about him and what he's like before. This is who he is. And God is not mad at you. And God, he is just for you. God loves you. And he proved it to you simply by the way he chose to bring his son into this world. Maybe you've never heard that. Maybe you've never thought about God that way. Or maybe you just need to be reminded this Christmas. So that's what I want you to ponder. That's what I want you to meditate on as we together sing this song.